Hey there, it's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol. That's wavetables.lol, home of KRC Mathwaves, my gigantic collection of more than 160,000 wavetables, single-cycle waveforms, and even some samples for all sorts of modern synthesizers, including our friend Korg modwave here, which is playing some waveforms that we'll talk about. You've heard these before. These are my friends, the polygonal wavetables, or a new version of them, that have these supernaturally bell-like tones. And today, what I want to talk about is actually KRC Mathwaves itself, the genesis for this project, and then also how I use machine learning to make some of my wavetables, and also how I used machine learning to learn how to make these kinds of wavetables with math. Now, this is not going to be a very musical video. It's not about synthesizer programming. It's going to be talky in the sense of I'm going to talk through some new machine learning models, specifically OpenAI's Deep Research model that's available in ChatGPT Pro, and also the new O3 Mini High model. Because I know people have been interested in how I got started with the Mathwaves project, and I have not made a secret of the fact that a lot of how I did this was in partnership with machine learning and AI systems, which, kind of like gave me superpowers in a way, with respect to doing work like this. And I greatly appreciate the fact that ChatGPT exists. And I'm talking about the paid versions of ChatGPT. None of this ever really worked in the free versions. But I want to talk about partnering with AI. I want to talk about these new models. And the central question we're going to ask today is, with these new models, if you were going to start a project like KRC Mathwaves, would you have a significantly better head start than I did when I started this project about 18 months ago in earnest? Now, that's really the part when I started getting serious about learning Python and, working with AI to figure out how to make mathematically constructed wavetables. But let's go back in time to the early 2000s to talk about like the genesis of this project. So I've not made a secret of the fact that the KRC Mathwaves was heavily inspired by this product called Galbanum Architecture Waveforms, which was available before 2010, but there was a big expansion to it that came out in 2010. And I think that I had the version before, although maybe it was 2010 when I first acquired this. I don't totally remember, and I have to go back through my receipts to see if I did. But Galbanum, excuse me, I'm itchy because my t-shirt's a little itchy. I don't know why. But what I'm wearing today, rustly. I'm wearing my classic MTV t-shirt today. As I mentioned in a previous video, all the women in my life decided without consulting each other to give me black t-shirts with cool prints on them for Christmas, in 2024. And so I'm slowly getting around to wearing all of them. Many of them are music themed. And so my friend LaDonna got me this, the classic neon MTV logo shirt, which I greatly enjoy. So thanks, LD. Anyway, so there's this product called Galbanum, and it's a collection of 25,000 not wavetables, actually. It says wavetables right here, but it's 25,000 waveforms and single cycle waveforms that were available in a lot of different formats. One of the formats was for a synth called Alchemy that I was really into. They were very useful there. They were useful with Absynth there was a set for. It's like it was a really incredible collection of things, and you could use these individual single cycle waveforms in all sorts of synthesizers in a similar way that KRC Mathwaves is usable in a lot of different synthesizers and contexts today. And originally it was just these single cycle waveforms, but the problem with having, the 25,000 like diverse waveforms, now they are categorized, but the problem with having that many things is like kind of sifting and sorting through them, like understanding what they sound like. So essentially what you'd end up doing is, either opening something like Absynth or Alchemy. They also worked with Metasynth, I guess. You could use them with samplers if you wanted to. But the problem is that they weren't easily auditionable. So you'd essentially be going through them at random, right? And you'd be like, oh, okay, well, this one's kind of interesting. And then you'd maybe go to the next one in the same collection and, hear how that was different. One challenge with the way, and this is still available, by the way, one challenge with auditioning them was that these individual little wave files that represent the waveforms themselves, like they didn't have like loop points set or anything. So if you brought them into an audio editor or you were auditioning them from, an audio editor or an early DAW, they wouldn't loop. And so you can't, they wouldn't seamlessly loop. And so you couldn't really hear what they sounded like until you brought them into a synth. Later, and this is still available as well, these were assembled into wavetables. But the way that the author did this is they took the different categories and they took those 25,000-ish waveforms and put them into wavetables with up to 256 waveforms apiece. And so that results in about 200 wavetables. Contrast that with the KRC Mathwaves project that's now way more than 160,000 wavetables. Anyway, 200 wavetables that would really be the style of wavetables that I would say are for picking out individual waveforms, because if you pack 256 waveforms into a wavetable and they're diverse, like they don't have they weren't designed to morph, you're just going to have a really weird morph. And so I felt that was a weakness of Galbanum, even though it's a very inspirational product. It's still available today. The Architecture Waveforms 2010, I think this is the wavetable version. Yeah, the wavetable version is $24.95. You get 200 wavetables with that. They're wave format wavetables. So they're like Serum compatible. I guess they would work with Vital. You can see this page is old because it says it works with a UVI Falcon, Tone 2 Icarus, Waves Codex, Synapse Dune. Those are synthesizers that I know that people use them. I don't mention them in my experience. The biggies now are Serum and Vital, that Bitwig's native polymer synth, Surge XT, which is an open source synth, but some people swear by it, and then things like Korg modwave, Korg multipoly. And then, of course, I also provide the 256 sample per frame format that's usable with phase plant, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I could go on and on about that. But I found this very interesting. And ever since I bought this, I think the first version I bought was maybe the 16-bit version. And then there was like a super pro version where the wavetables are provided in 64-bit format. That is still available too. That's actually overkill, but it was kind of sold as a professional like sound design product, that the license, let you, just like my license, would let you use it for personal use, and you could use these sounds, in patches that you made in your recordings, but you would have to contact Galbanum, to be able to redistribute them, which makes total sense. It's the same thing with my license. But it just, there were some difficulties in, actually like using this product. And I actually have never bought the wavetable version, but I can just tell from the description here that, we're turning 25,000 wavetables into 25,000 waveforms into 200 wavetables. Like, those are not going to be particularly interesting. So what I wanted to do is, I've just had this bee in my bonnet for many years. Like, I wanted to learn to make my own mathematically created single cycle waveforms, and specifically because there's a category inside of architecture waveforms called the polygonal-series waveforms. We'll just go there. I hope I'm not rambling too much. Do you know that I make long talky videos about synthesizer stuff? So like and subscribe for more talky synthesizer content. One thing that really caught my ear, and it took me actually a long time to find them because there's so many different categories and so many individual waveforms that these almost go unnoticed, but there's a category called series polygonal. Let's maybe zoom this in, and I hope this isn't behind my head. So the series polygonal waveforms, it says this group offers multidimensional, figurative, or two-dimensional polygonal number partials. Okay. For example, triangle numbers 1, 3, 6, 10, 15, 21, or square numbers 1, 5, 9, 16, 25, 36, etc. Okay, I actually, going into this, I understood what polygonal numbers were, and we could go read the Wikipedia page about polygonal numbers. And then it says the numbering of the file names, okay, provides the number of sides or the number of dimensions plus an integer offset to the partials. Okay. And then it goes on to say, these waveforms offer unique timbres that have hollow bell-like characterizes. I think he means characteristics. They can also be useful for pads when chorus effects are applied. And this is true. We're hearing a variation on those right now of my own creation. They're very interesting. I call them, God, I'm itchy again. Excuse me. I call them supernaturally bell-like. And there's actually not many examples of these waveforms in Galbanum Architecture Waves. It's almost like the original author of them didn't really notice like how special they were. But this interesting property of them being so sparse harmonically, and they have many partials that are zero, right? Like if we would look at the square numbers, so they go 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, and those numbers just keep getting bigger. These to me represent and sound like an entirely new class of synthesizer waveforms. Now there are bell-like waveforms in lots of synths. But this was the first time that I stumbled across waveforms with this very unique property. And the polygonal waveforms are even, different from using other numerical series. Other numerical series will make these sparse waveforms, and they do sound bell-like. There's just something kind of special and weird about the polygonal waveforms. And then also my own take on them, which, as I discussed in a previous video, the one that's called Polygonal Waveforms Redux, I discovered that when I originally computed these, I actually used the wrong series algorithm. It was a series algorithm that apparently some sort of error crept in. It's very much like the polygonal series, but it's not exactly. But the waveforms that it generates have similar properties, like similar sparseness and a similar acceleration of the harmonic numbers as we go up the number of harmonics. So anyway, the way that all of these waveforms are described, most of the waveforms in the Galbanum Architecture Waveforms collection were created with this kind of spectral technique where essentially it's additive. So where you take a sine wave and you just go by these numbers. So like if we wanted to make the square number wave, we would take a sine wave that's at full amplitude at harmonic number 1, and then we would add to that a fourth harmonic sine wave it's got a volume that's 1 over n, so that's 1/4 of the first one. We would add another sine wave at a harmonic 9, so it's 9 octaves above the fundamental at a 1 over 9 amplitude, etc. Now, you might imagine from looking at these descriptions, again, let's look at a different series. So here's the series MIS. It says perfectly band-limited waveforms created by summing large numbers of discrete sine partials in various specific series and amplitude ratios. And then it goes on to say, these series extend up to the 1024th partial. A lot of these other ones, they hint at, we're gonna sum some waves, up to 1024 partials. Then some of them are time domain, which is something that, I've gotten into later. And I just, basically for years, I couldn't understand exactly how these had been created. Like now I know that it's just an additive process, and I've showed that in great detail in the I talk about it in the polygonal waveforms redux video. I also talk about it, I think, and I explain it like a lot better because we talk about the Fourier series, and we talk about how we can do this type of additive synthesis in code with the square wave and the sawtooth wave, and we can change the harmonic falloff and stuff like that. But it took me a long time to figure that out. And I didn't get really serious about this until, because I'd always had this thought in my mind, and I had done some like other experiments, but I was more of a, I do web development stuff, I do digital marketing stuff, and I do have some web development shops. But, languages like JavaScript actually are not good for like writing, wave files. Like, even though JavaScript is like super cool and array oriented and et cetera, like you just go try, because of security problems, just go try writing, some sort of raw data to the file system using a language like that. So then, Python kind of comes up, right? And I kind of understood Python like back in the late 80s and early 90s. I did work on scientific fourth generation languages that were for scientific visualization. And so I was familiar with languages that would actually let you directly manipulate media files, directly manipulate data, and then write it to various formats. But I wasn't familiar with the modern approaches to that, where I think Python is the language that really excels. And of course, over time, there have been many, many libraries written for Python that help you do things like take this raw data and write it as a .wav file, right? So that's a big thing that happened in the time, since I purchased Galbanum Waveforms, and then I learned how to do this myself. The other accelerator that happened, and I'm sorry this is taking so long, I told you this would be a talky video. The other accelerator that happened was the advent of large language models. Now, I had been messing around with LLMs, like the very early versions, like before OpenAI like commercialized Chat GPT or even came up with Chat GPT, right? There was the GPT model. And I was fascinated by GPT-2, mostly as a creative tool, because in GPT-2, it was like a really, really fancy autocomplete. And when I was back in grad school, I was studying English after having studied mechanical engineering. And at that time, there was a lot of like experimental stuff going on. And the school that I went to had a creative writing program with like all these like wacko experimental artists and writers. Okay, wait, I need to change this. This taskbar, why is my taskbar open? I just want it to hide. So there were all these taskbar behaviors. Hide the taskbar. Thanks. Oh, that's better. I feel so much better. I can't believe I did like that much talkiness and didn't notice that my taskbar is just sitting there. You probably won't see it anyway, because I'll probably be zoomed in on my face. Anyway, when I was doing my master's work in English Lit, I was friends with a bunch of people in the creative writing school who were also in grad school. And there was a lot of like experimentation and a lot of like experimental authors involved in that school. And one thing that people did was messing around with technological approaches to creative writing. And so I had on like old PCs and shit, played around with things like Markov chains. Let's consume a bunch of text. Like I would take a friend's novel and I would like parse it with like, into a very, very simple kind of statistical system, and then kind of chop it up and use Markov chains to sort of make sensible words. This very experimental. You would get sentences that sort of made sense, but they'd be like all over the place. As a person slightly younger than that, I was fascinated by Ractor, which was supposedly kind of a computer writing system. And then, of course, as a youth, like I had typed in the code for Eliza, and you could chat with Eliza, right? The little psychotherapist kind of thing. Anyway, so I've always been fascinated by these kind of tools. It's drink time. So GPT-2 comes out, and I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. That you can, if you start with a weird prompt, then the completion will be equally weird. And I was like, all this is good for is creative writing and misinformation, maybe, right? Because you could start, you could write a paragraph about some sort of crazy conspiracy theory, right? And then it would kind of complete a story that goes on about that crazy conspiracy theory. Now, while that was cool, I had no conception, I had no belief that such a system would be the basis for AI. But, it turns out that as you started throwing more compute at that, and as you started building a bigger, training data set, that new behaviors started to emerge. And I thought it was still pretty bogus at, like, say, GPT-3. I was like, this is still just silliness. This is still only good for creative pursuits or just being weird. And I seem to have stuck modwave native. Let's panic, shall we? Everybody panic. I was like, I don't know. This doesn't seem like very intelligent. It could. You could pose questions and then it would post the answers, but it's like, wow, it seems really fragile. Then GPT 3.5 comes out, and 3.5 actually starts to look and sound like something with intelligence. It can write code. It can answer questions, at least up to the date that its data set contains information. So it doesn't know about, like, current events, but it'll know about things historically that are not past its cutoff date. And I was like, wow, that's really wild. Very interesting. The other thing that they start to do at that point is they can code. And so I had been writing a lot of JavaScript at that time. And I was doing plugins for low-code environments. Like, fundamentally, I guess I'm trying to say, I do like helping non-coders, make better web stuff, by providing plugins and things like that do advanced functions that you can't do in the low-code programming systems. And I've always been into these kind of fourth generation languages and graphical programming environments and things like that. So I was doing a lot of that. And one thing I realized at that point with like 3.5 is that it had a big enough context window that you could, in fact, if it didn't know anything about, say, a certain low-code development environment, you could feed it parts of the documentation, or you could kind of curate a list of weirdnesses or, like information about the API that it doesn't know about, and that it could then code against that API. And it could actually help you with creating new plugins that actually worked with the API. Now, it was a bit of a struggle to do that. It would make a lot of errors, et cetera, but it could accelerate, like, certain parts of your workflow if you're working on things like that. And so, the other thing that it could do, in addition to being very good at like web development types of stuff, that system was pretty good at Python. And I was like, And it's not like they were totally free of analytical capabilities as well. Like there was an element, to GPT-3.5 of like actually having a little bit of reasoning and, a little bit of analysis capability. And so I was like, maybe we could make like wavetables and waveforms with this, because I can finally, I can see that it can teach me about Python. It knows the libraries, like even though it can't execute the code, like maybe I could get to a point where I could do stuff like this. The other thing that was kind of interesting is that, in Serum, which is another popular wavetable synthesizer, created by Steve Duda, who's pretty brilliant, actually. I mean, Serum is pretty great. I prefer modwave to Serum, but I know that there's lots of people who vastly prefer Serum. And one of the reasons that Serum is great, even if you don't sort of love its sound, even if you don't necessarily love its effects, is that it has a wavetable editor inside of it. And so Serum is very interesting because it was a way to play with, say, all the single cycle waveforms that I had lying around out of Galbanum Architecture Waveforms, right? You could import them into different positions in the wavetable, and then you could interpolate them, and you would have a nice new wavetable. Again, with all of the problems, that I explained before. Like you're basically kind of shooting in the dark, like grabbing random waveforms and putting them together. But it also had a formula parser. And so one interesting thing that you could do with ChatGPT 3.5, and you could do this with the newer later versions as well, is you can take the Serum documentation for the formula parser, you can, shove that in a prompt into ChatGPT and then explore together with ChatGPT some ideas about formula parser for formulas that might make interesting wavetables. And in fact, this is sort of hidden in KRC Mathwaves. Again, KRC Mathwaves is just $29 for more than 160,000 wavetables in all the modern wavetable formats, vastly superior to our old friend Galbanum. Buried inside of KRC Mathwaves are some of my Serum formula parser experiments. Now, they're not in the wave versions or the WT versions. They're actually only in the modwave and Korg multipoly collections. But if you go into, let's select a wavetable. Let's go into, where's KRC? Where's Math 1? Math Volume 1. KRC Math Volume 1. Oh no, it's not inside there. It's its own. It's called KRC Inspirations. Oh, do I not have it installed? There it is. KRC Inspirations. So KRC Inspirations is a small collection of wavetables that I did with the formula parser. And another funny thing, if you follow me, is that, see, look at this guy. He's a little like the Morlet or the Morlaix wavelet wavetables, right? So these were made with the Serum formula parser, and if you follow me and you saw like my most recent video where I was doing a little bit of reminiscing about David Lynch, here's another example of how Lynchian I am. A lot of these inspirations wavetables are actually named for concepts out of Twin Peaks. So there's a wavetable called Log Lady. There's Agent Cooper here. What is Agent Cooper? Kind of a gentle, weird, mysterious, phase shifty, sine wavy thing. Anyway, Lynch is always around me, always present. So anyway, so that's how I kind of got started with custom wavetables. But then I did discover that we could do much more, and I decided to tackle. I just want to undo this. Stop that. I want to undo those changes. Let's go back to our chat polyfills. Okay, there we go. Anyway, I decided that, I should really try again to see if I could make these types of wavetables here and figure out how they were created, because it just hadn't occurred to me that it was just so easy to like to sum sine waves in this additive way. I mean, you can see from the description here, I think, that like you wouldn't necessarily guess this, and there were a lot of things to rule out. Like I had to rule out, is this talking about doing some spectral representation and then taking its inverse Fourier transform? Yeah, so there was that. Is it like, is there something else going on, et cetera, et cetera. And so it took me it was probably several weeks and probably many hours of back and forth with ChatGPT. And at this point that I'd really decided to do this, we were starting to get new features like the data analyst feature. So there were versions of ChatGPT, right, that had their own Python environment. And so that was really cool because you could sort of write Python together, right? It could write Python that you sort of dictate, what you want the program to do. And then it could execute it in its environment. So you could kind of rapidly iterate, or fast fail, maybe, if you're not really making progress. And so it took a couple weeks, but like I finally, and also we did some crazy things. Like it's like, here, look at this documentation. You see what it's saying? Hey man, what do you think this means? And it never got the right answer, right? It was like, it did not on its own be like, I think this is just additive synthesis, and here's an algorithm we could do for additive synthesis in Python. And then we could just write it out as this wave file in the right wavetable format. Like the whole formats thing was a whole other issue. But anyway, like finally, through a lot of back and forth, I finally figured out how to make an exactly 2048 sample wavetable with up to 64 frames because I wanted to support modwave. I already understood that like a 64 frame wavetable, in 32-bit wave format was the way to go here to support the widest number of wavetable synthesizers. Basically finally got it working. And then once you've got that working, right? Like once you can do, and the first thing I did was the polygonal waveforms. Now, they were kind of inaccurate, but they were close enough for jazz. They got the sound that I wanted. And I was able to, because it's just code and because the only limit is your time and patience and creativity in terms of different variations that you want to try. I was able to make thousands of those. And then I could move on and do other numerical series. And actually some of the other things in Galbanum were inspirational to me. Like the gated log was another thing I did. I think there's essentially the same thing as the gated log waveforms in Galbanum in KRC Mathwaves. And they do sound kind of interesting. And then from there, it was just like wild experimentation with all sorts of other numerical concepts, again, in the spectral domain. Until I had a library of like, 30,000-ish waveforms. And then I started experimenting with how you could put them together in wavetables in ways that are not explored in Galbanum, like the RAIM technique, which has a start and end points and then kind of a non-linear time morphing through them. And just a whole bunch of other things, right? So that I wound up with the first version of KRC Mathwaves, which was about 36,000 wavetables, the component 26,000 single cycle waveforms, which actually I thought that was maybe going to be the focus. Originally, I thought that the focus might be on single cycle waveforms and not really on wavetables, but I don't think anyone's interested in the single cycle waveforms. But the single cycle waveforms are available as multi-samples for like wave states. They're really cool with that. You can import them into wave state and you can get all sorts of new synthy tones and these bell-like tones that are not part of wave state, from the factory set. So anyway, blah-de blah blah blah, like and subscribe for more talky synthesizer content. So the question I want to ask today is, since that work where I, basically figured out how to make wavetables this way, I was wondering what would happen today if you started that project. So, and this is a timely question because there is a new model for ChatGPT. It's only available in ChatGPT Pro, which I know is ridiculously priced at $200 a month right now. But I actually use this tool for a lot of different things. So not just development in terms of KRC Mathwaves, but I use it for certain types of content creation. I use it for certain types of like SEO analysis, other types of coding. It's like saved my butt when I needed to convert like one crazy JSON format to another format, and just it's automated away like a whole bunch of other types of professional work for me. And so I think it's worth the money. And then, as you probably know, if you watch my channel, I'm kind of fascinated by AI image generation and video generation, even though the output can be crap. Like, I love the weirdness of it. It fits my aesthetic. And so I find it, at least for the meantime, a useful $200 a month. It pays for itself in the time it saves me and the productivity that it gives me. But I know that's not true for everybody. I use it in these weird ways. Yeah. I don't just use it as an oracle. I'm not just trying to, answer a question like how many R's are in the word strawberry. LLMs don't do that, right? Like, if you know anything about LLMs, it's like, that's a dumb thing to do. And you're just wasting resources to ask that question. You're also wasting resources to ask it to do math in its head. You don't want to do that. You want it to write some code to do some math problem. Huh? Anyway, it's funny how people misunderstand tools, isn't it? But whatever. Okay. So anyway, there's a new model. There's two new models that are out. So there's O3 Mini. So O3 is the latest of OpenAI's reasoning models. So these are large language models that have a technique called chain of thought. And maybe more than that. But they can reason. They're allowed to spend more time thinking. They can kind of have a feedback loop of thinking. And so they can do things that approximate human reasoning. And O3 Mini High is very interesting. And then there's another new feature called Deep Research. And Deep Research also uses a version of O3. And it's extremely interesting. And I was like, hey, I wonder, and actually you can read about O3. Let me just, there's always links in the description. There'll be links in the description, okay? But let's look at O3 Mini. Here we go. OpenAI has a whole article about it in their blog. You can read about like sort of how it works and how it's available and like what it does. But so I was excited to try this. And then before I really got to try this, they'd announced the Deep Research model. And so the question is, like, could OpenAI O3 Deep Research, could it crack the wavetable code, right? Could it, with a simple prompt, how long would it take us to get to the point where we've got code that makes the polygonal waveforms and then opens up a whole new area of exploration and capability for us, huh? So I'm going to take a short break, and then I'm going to show you what I did. This is just a couple nights ago. I'm not going to do this live because it does take several minutes of thinking and stuff, and I don't want to talk over this. Well, I could talk over it. I don't want to talk over it while it just sits there and thinks, but I'm going to show you the output of this experiment, and it's pretty interesting. Like and subscribe for more talky synthesizer content. I'll be right back. So this new mode called Deep Research, I'm in a like a previous session here, so I'm just going to show you like what happened. But if we were using this from scratch, like we would click this button here that says Deep Research, and we could make some sort of query. And what this model does is it's allowed to think for up to a half hour, and it also has access to the web. And so it will go out, and it's very good at this, by the way. It will go out and it will find, sources to research, right, on the web. It reads them, and then it can respond to them. Now, what I did in this experiment, which is just a couple days old, and again, the goal of this experiment is to see, like, if I pretend to be a dum-dum, but I just have this idea that I want to duplicate this, or at least do something inspired by this product called Galbanum Architecture Waveforms, specifically with respect to the polygonal-number-series, could it make these wavetables? And I want it to make the code. So here's the query. There's a more than decade-old product called Galbanum Architecture Waveforms. That is so hard to say. That's a large collection of single-cycle waveforms and wavetables for various wavetable synthesizers. I'm interested in developing some Python code that can create wavetables like this. I'd like to know what the various common wavetable formats are, and I'd like to be able to create wavetables based on the polygonal number series, which is one of the many waveform/wavetable types represented in Galbanum. I'd like code that can create wavetables based on various numerical series. So this is it would be a best practice to do something a little more specific than this. But, you can see I cover all the bases. I'm like, here's what I want to do, but I don't know how to do it, right? And so what deep research will do is it'll come back with some clarifying questions. And then I answered them. So, it asks about wavetable formats. And this is interesting because it seems to know like a lot about wavetable formats, even without doing the research. Like this is sort of new in these newer models. Like older versions of the model did not know much about audio synthesis. And I'm sure that some of their knowledge has come from people like me working with these systems. But see, it asks like, do you want a general overview of common wavetable formats, or do you have specific synths in mind? Serum, Vital, WaveEdit, Ableton Wavetable. And then numerical series. Besides polygonal number series, do you have other mathematical sequences in mind? And then it proposes Fibonacci, prime numbers, harmonic series, etc. Those are all wavetables I've done in KRC Mathwaves. And then output format. Do you want the wavetables to be output as WAV files, CSV files, or raw arrays for integration with specific synths? And then it asks about the number of waveforms, and then also interpolation and smoothing. So I answer those questions, right? And I say, okay, look, I'm interested in supporting Serum and Vital, which I think use the same format. I know they use the same format. But also Korg modwave, Surge XT/Bitwig, and Faceplant. Research on the most popular wavetable synths would be useful. Number 2, I think once we can do the polygonal number series, I'll be able to modify the code to do others, so just focus on the polygonal number series for right now. Boy, I'm having mush mouth today. 3, I'm not sure what the format of modern wavetables is. It might be wave files. It is, in most cases, but there may be other formats. I also don't know what the exact specs are, e.g. how many frames, size of the frames, etc. That's one thing that really needs some research. And then 4, the number of waveforms should be adjustable and accommodate the rules used by the most popular wavetable synths. And then in answer to question 5, since the waveforms themselves will be mathematically generated, I don't think we'll need further processing as long as the code generates the wavetables in the correct formats. Now there was a little bug in I think I did this research the first day this was available, and you kind of had to kick it into action. Like it sat there and spun for a while, and I had to go like, hey, does that give you enough to get started? But then once it starts the researching, it actually thought for 7 minutes. And if we click this, we can see what it did. It goes out and it searches. It must have its own search engine. And it has its own like very fast connection to the interweb because it does this research very fast. So it looked at X4 records. This is the Serum site. It found a audio bus wiki entry that it read. Then it searches for Serum wavetable 256 frames. It finds a source on Reddit, and then as it's doing this and it's telling you like what it's doing, it's also compiling sources. And so we can see specifically what URLs it read. So we could go and we can investigate these if we want to. We can see that, so here it discovered, this is Steve Duda. We can see it discovered some information about the CLM chunk in Serum. That's actually some special metadata that you can add to Serum wave format files. It reads some Reddit posts, how to turn sampled waveforms into wavetables. Et cetera, right? So, and then, it discovers me. It looks at kcrosley.gumroad.com. That's the same thing as wavetables.lol. And what does it learn? It went and read my product page for KRC Mathwaves. That's interesting. So I become a citation in here. What else does it do? Wavetable file format. It goes and looks at this thing on KVR audio. What is that about? What did it learn? I don't see the highlighted text. That worked. It reads this. 2048 samples per frame. It's kind of general information about the CLM chunk and the size of wavetables in Serum. Super interesting, right? So anyway, after researching for just 7 minutes and identifying 15 sources, including yours truly in 2 different places, let's see, what's the other thing it found from me? Oh, the free wavetables. So I read the product page here and found something interesting. Interesting? Did it find anything else? It's interesting. Oh yeah, it found some of my blog posts and stuff that had, more authoritative information. A lot of stuff from me, actually. And well, it's good that I'm helping myself here in the future. Oh, look, here's some stuff about WT format. Anyway, so it comes back with this great report. So wavetable formats in popular synthesizers. And it goes on to describe in great detail the wavetable formats used by Serum, Vital, Modwave, SurgeXT/Bitwig, and Phaseplant. And it correctly, all this information that it came up with is actually correct. So it learned that Serum uses wave files. The wave contains the audio data for all frames. Serum adds a CLM chunk to the file header for metadata. This chunk identifies the wave as a wavetable and stores additional info. Serum's format has become something of a de facto standard adopted by many other synths. That is completely correct. It notes that a frame, in terms of frames per wavetable, there can be up to 256 frames in a wavetable. That the bit depth, let's see, is 2048 samples per frame, 32-bit floating point PCM wave file. Oh, it can also read 16 or 24-bit, but 32-bit float would be standard. Import-export requirements, it says, it basically gives you all the details, right? So it knows everything now about Serum format. And now in Vital, it's Vital also uses wave files for wavetables. All this is correct too. So Vital can support up to 256 frames at 2048 samples each. It can directly import Serum format wavetables, blah, blah, blah. Bit depth is 32-bit. Will also import 16 or 24-bit, just like Serum. Blah, 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 blah. Talks about the export capabilities of Vital. What does this say here? It talks about Vital Table. There's this Vital Table extension, but that you should stick to Wave. Then it talks about Korg modwave, and it finds that Korg modwave can import custom wavetables that are wave files that are basically compatible with Wave Edit or Serum. Now, this is interesting, frames per wavetable. It correctly learns that modwave wavetables can have up to 64 frames. The wave should contain 1 to 64 single-cycle waveforms laid out back-to-back, and it actually refers to the specific modwave documentation that's in the owner's manual. Unlike Serum, which can go to 256 frames, the modwave is limited to 64 frames, and if you try to import a wavetable with more, it'll automatically reduce it, which it goes on to talk about more. Frame size and bit depth. You got 2 wave formats, 32-bit float with 2048 sample frames, or 16-bit PCM with 256 sample frames. That's the wave edit format, or really Korg's customized wave edit format. Then it makes a recommendation. Use the 32-bit 2048 sample format for highest quality. Talks about import. It talks about how it decimates the wavetable if it's bigger than 64 frames, etc. Oh my God, and there's more information about the specific, MW bundle format. It even tells you how to do it. Korg's recommended workflow is to use the special Wave Edit ModWave edition to create the wave, then use the import wave as wavetable command in the library and to bring it in. That is exactly what you do. But then it says, hey, if you're generating the wavetable programmatically, you can skip Wave Edit. Just output the correct wave file. For example, generate 64 waves with 2048 samples and 32-bit float, concatenate them to a web file, then import that. It goes on to talk about the WT format and SurgeXT and Bitwig. Again, this is all correct. It's a whole report. I should probably edit this a little bit and post it to my own Gumroad blog, because this is great information that summarizes things even better than I could. And it only took 7 minutes. It would take me, 2 hours to write this report on the different wavetable formats. It gets Phaseplant right as well. Phaseplant can load wave or FLAC, but it does note that it has to have exactly 256 frames per wavetable, which is kind of a big hassle with my support of Phaseplant, and I am still working on converting all of the KRC Mathwaves Wavetables 2-phase plant format, but they're very large and it takes a long time. Mostly just the upload procedure, like making them available, is sort of the gating factor, but I will get there eventually. Anyway, it talks about like they don't need any special metadata, etc. So then it goes on, guidelines for programmatic wavetable generation. So I would say it's doing pretty well right now, right? This information is actually just kind of a rehash of the info above, but it's a summary of like, if you were going to make wavetables for all these things, here are all the things you would have to do. And then at that point, it just ends. So in summary, it says 2048 frames, 32-bit float waves are the closest thing to a universal format. It cites me for that information. You can then convert or down sample that base format for specific synth requirements. Perfect. And that's exactly what I do. So it comes up with, at least for the file formats and stuff, the same approach that I would make. And then it gives you all the references to all of the information that it found that's a source for this. Now, you'll note that it kind of crapped out on writing code, right? It was like, it learned so much and it had so much information to share that it did not get around to writing the code for the polygonal waveforms. So again, pretending to be a bit of a dum-dum, I was like, I do deep research again. So this prompt I entered with the deep research thing clicked so that it can think for a long time. And I said, okay, thanks for that great summary of wavetable formats. Now, given that we know about the most common formats, for example, it sounds like wave files with 64 frames and a frame size of 2048 samples per frame would support most of the synthesizers on this list. Can we now figure out how to create Python code for creating wavetables similar to the ones in Galbanum Architecture Waves, specifically wavetables based on the polygonal number series? Again, after kicking it into action, it researches for just 4 minutes, and it does all of this kind of stuff. So it reads some Vital Forum posts, it reads galbanum.com, it reads some posts on Gearspace, it searches for polygonal number series wavetable synthesis, it reads this one, what is nathan.ho.name? It also reads the Wikipedia entry for the polygonal number series, and then it reads a Vital Audio thing. But again, it did this in just 4 minutes. Oh, it didn't cite Nathan.ho. What is this? I wonder how it got here. I don't know what Nathan.ho is. Technical writing about digital signal processing. There must have been something interesting in here for it. Or maybe it's just because it's like general spectral synthesis kind of stuff. This looks like a great site. I didn't notice this one before. And then, so after that 4 minutes, it gives us this report. Generating wavetables from polygonal number series in Python. I'm sorry I can't speak properly today. I'm such a dum-dum. So wavetables based on polygonal number series use mathematical sequences, triangular numbers, square numbers, pentagonal numbers, etc. to shape the waveform. This is true. Such waveforms can have a distinctive bell-like timbre and are hinted at in collections like Galbanum's Architecture Waveforms. This is a reference to a post by me. In this guide, we'll develop Python code to generate these wavetables with the following features. And so then it maps out everything that I had asked it to do before. It gives us a section on understanding polygonal number sequences. So I wouldn't have to go and read the Wikipedia entry because it summarized it for me here. And all of this is correct. And then this is really interesting. So now, remember, I didn't tell it that this was going to be an additive synthesis technique, right? And this is the part that had me stuck for like several weeks while I hammered this out. It says the numeric series can affect a waveform in several ways. We need to define how the polygonal numbers map to sound wave characteristics. And it gives us 3 options. 2 of these are things I hadn't thought of before. So the first one, harmonic selection, spectral content, this is additive synthesis. So it says use the series values as indices of harmonics to include in the waveforms for your composition. For example, using triangular numbers, harmonics 1, 3, 6, 10, as harmonic numbers means only those harmonic frequencies are present. This approach directly shapes the timbre by including or excluding specific harmonics. It tends to yield inharmonic or bell-like tones, again it references me, because the harmonic series is non-uniform, missing the 2nd, 4th, 5th harmonics in the triangular case. We will focus on this method for our implementation. And then, but it gives two other alternatives. We could use the polygonal numbers for amplitude shaping. And I'm going to have to explore this one more because I don't totally understand what this might sound like. But it said we could use the series values to shape the amplitude envelope of one cycle of the waveform. For example, one could generate a single cycle waveform whose amplitude at certain points follows the rising or modulated pattern of the series. This might involve normalizing the series and mapping it across the 2048 samples. So this is like a time domain technique. This might, blah, blah, blah. However, care must be taken to ensure the waveform starts and ends at the same level and does not introduce DC offset. This method can produce interesting asymmetrical wave shapes, but is less straightforward to keep it periodic because most polygonal sequences are strictly increasing. That is not inherently periodic. So that's an interesting idea, but it's not the most obvious one. And so, it's not going to try that right now. And then instantaneous frequency modulation. This one is interesting. Interpret the series as controlling the instantaneous frequency, that is the phase increment, within the cycle. For example, the waveform's frequency could momentarily jump according to the series values, effectively warping the wave. This is Casio phase distortion synthesis. Ironically, I just talked about this 2 videos ago. Like, I said you could call this time distortion. So it's like, this is a thing you could also do. So I'm going to explore this, actually. This would give completely different waveforms that would not have the bell-like timbres, but I'm very interested in this idea. So it says, using this method would result in a form of phase distortion, or FM, potentially creating inharmonic spectra. So, in practice, it summarizes, the harmonic selection approach is the most straightforward for guaranteeing a periodic waveform that clearly reflects the numeric series. We will implement this. Treat each polygonal number as a harmonic number with certain amplitude in an additive synthesis summation. The other approaches, blah, 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 could be explored by advanced users, like me. Then it's just saying that, okay, what it says in this next section is we're going to generate 2 of these polygonal waveforms, and then we're just going to do a time linear interpolation between them to arrive at our 64 frame wavetable. That's good enough as a starting point. It notes that it's a linear crossfade. It writes down some steps for itself so it can write the code. And then it does some smart things, actually. I want to talk about this real quick. Create a waveform from harmonics. Oh, here we go. Using the series from step 1 as harmonic indices, we'll construct a single cycle waveform by summing sine waves, add those harmonic frequencies. Each frame will be 2048 samples long, representing one period. We can assign amplitudes to these harmonics, equal amplitude or a decaying curve, and we'll normalize the waveform to fit in the range of -1 to 1. This is interesting because it understands that we could do different amplitude fall-offs. Now, ultimately, the waveforms that I want would use a 1/n, but we'll see what it does here. Now we'll proceed with the Python code. So it writes the Python code. As I look at this, and as I looked at it when it originally wrote it, I'm like, oh my God, this is correct. So basically, after 7 minutes of researching wavetable formats, after 4 minutes of researching and thinking about the polygonal numbers and how they might be turned into a waveform, this arrives at exactly the code that I ultimately arrived at after weeks of experimentation. But the question is, does it run? And so then it gives an explication of all the different parts of the code. It does note, where is the thing about amplitude? Somewhere there's a note about the amplitude. Usage and further adjustments. Oh, here we go. So with the above code, you could easily experiment with different polygonal sequences or mapping methods. Try changing start and end sides to different values. Yeah. If you want a wavetable that uses only one sequence, no morph, you could set both sides and end sides to the same value or skip interpolation. That's a great tip. Here we go. You can experiment with the amplitude distribution of harmonics. For a smoother sound, you might set higher harmonics to lower amplitude. So it actually specifically suggests exactly what I wound up doing, and actually exactly what Galbanum does, which is to set the amplitudes to a 1/n ratio based on the harmonic number. But it notes that its existing code sets all the amplitudes the same. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is amazing, right? So I say, thanks, you did a pretty good job on that research. Can you execute the Python code in your own environment? Now, this is weird. At this point, O3 Mini thinks that it can run the run the script, but that hasn't been enabled yet. So it actually thinks it can call the tool to run this code, but this will fail. It writes out all the code again as if it's entering it. And then, oh, actually this one did do it. I'm pretty sure that somewhere in here, I must have skipped something. I think I maybe had to switch, or maybe it automatically switched to a version that has the environment. So anyway, after some time, I remember there was some thrash in there. It actually generates the wavetable, and then it plots the two waveforms for me. And you've probably seen these type of waveforms before if you have KRC Mathwaves. And then it gave me a link to download polygonal-number-series. Is it there? Yeah, see, this is expired, so it's not there. Now, so anyway, here I had downloaded it before, and I imported it into modwave. So here's that wavetable. Bum, bum. Let's go shut off oscillator 2, and let's just listen to this. Go down a couple octaves. So these are unmistakably the sound of the polygonal waveforms, just only that we had not changed the amplitudes. This will be similar. Let's see, where's KRC Math 1? That wavetable is very similar to the, let's see, polygonal, like the fractional polygonal wavetables, I think. Yeah, see how these are kind of clustery like that? They're really close together in some places. That's because the harmonics are not dropping off with the 1/n ratio. Oops, we're back to this one. So anyway, so now the question is, can we generate these? And so what I said is like, okay, so that's great. Like it works and imported to modwave, but one issue is that like all the harmonics have the same amplitude, so it makes it kind of busy, makes it kind of nasal. We should probably use an amplitude falloff of 1/n for each harmonic. What do you think? It thinks about that for just a couple seconds and said, yep, using 1/n amplitude falloff would be a best practice in additive synthesis, blah, blah, blah. Do you want me to update the code? I say, yep, update the code and share it with me, then execute it. So it shares the updated code with me. It tries to execute it. Oh, and it did it. I must be misremembering the fact that it didn't execute. So, okay, so it executed, and then it gave me this wavetable. So this is the polygonal wavetable ChatGPT 2, as I've saved it here. Sounds like that, which is exactly what I was going for. Oh, here's where I got a file error. Here's where that happened. So the first time, I think it worked right, and then the second time, it wouldn't generate it. And so I had to switch. Once I switched to another model, it's weird. I don't know why it let me access its environment, and then I had to switch to, I think I went to GPT 4.0. Yeah, GPT 4.0 model. So anyway, then it successfully generates these, and you can see that those are the two waveforms that we got. So there's the triangular frame, which is the light colored one, the pentagonal frame, and it's got this nice morphing wavetable. All right, so the point of this, even though it took me like that long to like talk about this, is that with 11 minutes of thinking and a very vague prompt, ChatGPT Deep Research completely discovered how to make these Galbanum-style wavetables. I think that's pretty amazing. Now, it did cite me, so I guess if this had been 18 months ago, maybe some of the information it would need to really do this wouldn't have been on the web. But it's also clear that it did read the Galbanum documentation, and it did understand what was in there, and so it did intuit that this additive synthesis, this harmonic synthesis approach would be the right one. But it also came up with another couple of great ideas. I just think this is really fascinating. Oh, there's another thing I want to talk about here. I just think it's incredibly fascinating that it did this so rapidly. Like, so this is orders of magnitude better than what we had in terms of LLM-based AI when I started the KRC Mathwaves project. And so imagine how many other things you could research and discover, not just in the areas of music, but in other areas of coding and other areas of technology, like using these kind of systems. So this is why I love LLMs. This is why I really like working with ChatGPT, because it just becomes more and more powerful. I also find these new versions a little more creative, and I could talk about that more maybe in a future video. Okay, so the result of our test here is that ChatGPT Deep Research can crack the wavetable code. It did it in record time, finding all of the right resources that it needs, and it wrote flawless code. And so I could now proceed to make all sorts of other waveforms if I understand that code. And by the way, if you don't know Python, you don't understand that code, well, you could just ask Chat to explain it to you in more detail. And it could also help you set up your local Python environment. Like, this is exactly the path that I followed, except that what took me weeks would have taken me 15 minutes today. One thing that it did mention in its decisions about generating these waveforms is it did decide to generate these out to 1024 harmonics. And it said in the text, it's up above here somewhere, it said in the text that we should generate out to the 1024th harmonic because that's where the Nyquist limit is. And it wasn't clear to me that that was correct. And I wanted it to justify that. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's correct, but I wanted it to justify it. So after it had done this, I said, that worked great, but I do have a question. In your code comments, you said, generate polygonal-number-series up to Nyquist. 2048 divided by 2 equals 1024 harmonics max for the 2048 length wave table. And then also in its text explanation, you said, we use max value 1024 to get all harmonic indices up to the Nyquist limit, blah, blah, blah. Now, while my own experience in creating single-cycle waveforms and wavetables tells me that the use of up to 124 harmonics is a good way to produce additive waveforms like these, I'm not sure your rationale is correct. For example, in modern wavetable synths, let's say we're using the first frame of our wavetable. That wavetable is 2048 samples in length. If I hit a middle A, something like G-A, that 2048 sample waveform will be played at in full 440 times per second. That is A equals 440 hertz. Doesn't this imply that Nyquist is different for every key on the keyboard, or at least for every octave? What I'm asking you to do is explain/prove that using 1024 frequency bins makes sense, and please show your work. I hope you understand what I'm getting at. I don't doubt you're correct. I just want to know why. So after 7 seconds, it says, yeah, you and your intuition is correct that the Nyquist limit for a stored single-cycle waveform is relative to its length rather than to the note being played. Let me explain in detail. Now, actually, that's more like what it was saying. That's not really what my question was, but these models kind of get confused between, you and me. Like, you kind of have to think of them as a joint intelligence. It's like, we're kind of working here together, and so, it's like, it acknowledges the confusion. It says, let me explain. When you create a single cycle waveform that is 2048 samples long, you can think of it as one period of a periodic function. It's one cycle of the waveform, right? So then it says, according to Fourier theory, any periodic function can be decomposed into a sum of sine and cosine, or complex exponential functions with frequencies that are integer multiples of the fundamental frequency. Okay, duh. For a waveform defined over n samples, that in our case n is 2048, the Fourier series has n coefficients, so that's 2048 Fourier coefficients. However, the real valued signal, for a real valued signal, the Fourier transform has conjugate symmetry, which means that only the first n over 2 coefficients represent unique independent harmonics. Ah, interesting. So, for n equals 2048, the highest independent harmonic you can represent is the 1024th harmonic. In other words, you synthesize your single cycle using additive synthesis, you can include harmonics from 1 to 1024. That's why when I set max value to 1024, it ensures we're using the full range of harmonics that a 2048 single cycle sample can represent without redundancy. It goes on to explain this. So this is interesting. I hadn't actually really thought of it this way, but it's basically the number of samples that you have in a frame of a wavetable constrains the maximum number of harmonics that it can represent. So for a 2048 sample per frame wavetable, we have 1024 harmonics to play with. But if we think about something like, say, the Waldorf microwave, which recently came out as a VST and I did a short review on, in that synthesizer, the wavetable format only has 128 samples per frame. So what that means is that a Waldorf microwave only has the first 64 harmonics to work with. That's kind of interesting, and I will now never forget this fact, because the number of samples you have in a frame, you have that, and that's the max number of harmonics that you can control or accurately represent with that frame. I think that's super interesting. I hadn't actually ever really thought of it that way. So, you know, you learn something new every day. Thanks, chat, Deep Research. With that, I think I'm going to say ta-ta for now. Hey, if you like stuff like this, if you like the sound of these wavetables, if you want 160,000 plus wavetables for all sorts of modern wavetable synthesizers, go to wavetables.lol and get KRC Mathwaves. There's also a sampler version of it that's 1,600 wavetables that gives you a tiny glimpse into the full collection. I hope you enjoyed this not being a gatekeeper episode of our Talky Synthesizer content show. Talked about how I originally learned to do stuff like this. I've given you the capability to maybe work with an AI friend and make your own wavetables. Of course, I'm paying $200 a month for access to ChatGPT Pro. KRC Mathwaves is just $29, and I continue to enhance it all the time. So if you're not the kind of person that likes to get their hands dirty in code to make your own wavetables, well, for just $29, you can have basically a lifetime supply of wavetables. Like, no one will ever be able to explore all of the possibilities that are there, but I keep adding new stuff anyway. With that, it's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol saying ta-ta for now.